Imagine a decision made in a flash, yet so profoundly impactful it would echo through centuries. In a moment of sheer hunger, a simple bowl of lentils was all it took to alter the course of generations. Esau, the hunter, the firstborn, the strong man of Seir, saw his very name transform into a symbol of sorrow and division. But was it truly that simple? Was Esau merely a victim of his own impulsiveness, or was there something more behind this story? Why did God declare, "I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated"? What really happened inside that tent when the destiny of two brothers was sealed forever, and how does the ripple effect of that choice still influence nations today? Prepare to dive into the hidden truth behind the astonishing story of Esau, a narrative rich with betrayals, pivotal choices, and a legacy that could never be erased. Before we delve into this captivating tale, subscribe to the Knowing the Word channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the deep and often overlooked stories from the Bible. Your support truly helps us continue this work and bring these powerful narratives to life. Now let's get into the story. The wind whispered across Isaac's tents, carrying with it the dust and the murmurs of a people awaiting new life. Rebekah, lying on soft cloths, clutched her trembling womb. Her eyes squeezed shut, trying to hold back the pain that pierced her body like a blade. She felt something strange about her pregnancy. It wasn't just the usual discomfort of advanced weeks. It was as if a silent battle was raging inside her. Isaac, at her side, held her hand, his face mirroring her uncertainty. The hushed words of the servants blended with the rustling of the palm trees. "It's a sign. Her womb is not at peace." Days stretched on, and the turmoil in Rebekah's womb only increased. Each morning, the woman woke up sweaty, her chest heaving, her gaze lost in space. Isaac sought comfort in his prayers, but the heavens seemed distant. Distraught, Rebekah sought the Lord, and the answer came like a silent clap of thunder. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. When the time came, Rebekah's cry tore through the tense silence. The midwives approached, and the first to emerge was a robust boy, covered in reddish hair, his body rough like an animal's hide. Murmurs began, "It's the firstborn." They named him Esau. Before the murmurs even died down, another boy came forth, clutching his brother's heel. Esau's cries mingled with the sound of a struggle that seemed endless. The rivalry had begun, even before they drew their first breaths. Isaac held Esau in his arms, the feel of his coarse skin, the strength of his tiny clenched fists, the scent of earth clinging to the newborn. All this made his heart swell with pride. This one will be a hunter, he thought, a man of the fields, free as the wind, wild as the earth. Meanwhile, Rebekah looked at the second boy, Jacob, smaller, with smooth skin and watchful eyes. The contrast was stark. One rugged, the other refined. One instinct, the other strategy. The promise hung invisibly in the air, but no one could yet grasp its weight. Esau grew strong. His steps were heavy on the ground, and his voice carried the deep tone of one who knew the fields. He spent his days pursuing wild animals, his bow firm in his hands, his clothes stained with sweat and dust. When he returned, the aroma of hunted meat filled Isaac's tent, and his father's smile was the reward for his effort. But in Rebekah's eyes there was a shadow. She knew the weight of the prophecy could not be ignored. Esau's destiny seemed set. He was the elder, the natural heir, the holder of the blessing that extended from Abraham to Isaac. Yet there was something fragile in his path, a crack that grew daily. He trusted in his strength, his skill as a hunter, his role as provider. The sweat on his face was the mark of his identity. But in the silence of the night, as the stars shone over the tents, Esau didn't realize that something bigger was slipping through his fingers. Jacob, on the other hand, observed, silent and watchful. He studied his brother like someone waiting. For the right moment to act, and time, relentless, moved forward. Esau, the eldest son, the heir, was also the man who disregarded the unseen things. His world was the now, the taste of the hunt, the weight of the bow, the smell of fresh blood in the field. But there was a promise that couldn't be seen, a blessing that couldn't be touched, and that's precisely what Esau didn't know how to hold on to. Nights were long, and Esau, exhausted from hunting, would fall asleep with his head on his arms, unaware that Jacob, lurking in the shadows of the tents, watched him like someone studying a target. The rivalry that began in Rebekah's womb was about to spill over. Esau's unwitting silence hid a fatal ignorance. The strong man isn't always the heir of destiny. That dawn, as the wind howled over the fields of Canaan, Esau's story was just beginning. The elder was born first, but the battle within Rebekah's womb hadn't ended yet. The sun of Canaan blazed high over Isaac's tents, casting long shadows across the plain. Esau walked among the flocks with firm steps, his bow slung over his shoulder, his hands calloused from handling ropes and spears. His skin, tanned by wind and sun, exuded the scent of earth mixed with the sweat of intense days. From a young age, Esau had found in the fields the place for his strength. There, amidst the rustling of bushes and the snapping of branches, he felt alive, free as the wind, fierce as the prey he hunted. Isaac watched him from afar with silent pride. When Esau returned home bringing slaughtered animals, the smoke of the roasting meat over the fire seemed like an incense of honor rising to his father's heart. "This is my son, my heir," Isaac thought, becoming ever blinder to the invisible details, ever more captivated by the scent of the hunt. But Rebekah saw something else. Her eyes followed Esau with a concern that hid in the wrinkles around her lips. She noticed his lack of prudence, the haste that propelled her eldest son's steps, a hunger that was not just for meat, but also for power, for pleasure, for an unbridled life. Esau was loved by his father, but Rebekah felt a distance, like a river separating their hearts. She turned her gaze to Jacob, silent, always in the shadow, always attentive. A different son, not strong like his brother, but shrewd, patient like one who waits for the right time to act. Esau didn't see this. He walked proudly, his hands stained with blood, his chest full of the free air he breathed in the fields. Every animal slaughtered was a conquest, every accurate arrow a trophy. The world seemed simple to him: hunt, provide, please his father. But in his simplicity there was a lack of depth, a blindness that grew silently. He didn't notice Rebekah's heavy silence, nor the glances exchanged between Jacob and his mother. The camp was divided by murmurs and preferences. Servants commented on Esau's skill, but others observed Jacob's cunning. The tents whispered stories of a firstborn loved by his father, but without the blessing of vision, and of a younger brother who waited silently for his moment to act. Esau, for his part, just laughed. The worries of the heart were strange to him. The land was enough for him, the smell of the hunt, the weight of the bow, the taste of meat in his mouth. That was life. But what Esau didn't know was that the field where he felt strong was also the place of his vulnerability. The hunter's strength kept him from the invisible things, the blessing, the covenant, the promise. He despised what couldn't be hunted. For Esau, blessings had no smell, taste, or weight. They weren't real. Only when they became tangible, like the sweat that ran down his forehead or the blood that stained his hands, were they worth something. Time passed. Nights piled up over the tents, and Esau increasingly became a man of the earth. But the earth for him, was just ground. It wasn't inheritance, it wasn't a promise. It was just space to run, hunt, conquer. Esau didn't hear the whispers of old covenants between Abraham and the invisible God. He didn't understand the weight of what he carried. As the firstborn, he was strong, but that strength hid a fragility, the inability to value what couldn't be touched. Jacob, always observing, knew this. He saw his brother like someone watching an animal running freely in the field, unaware of the trap closing in. Esau didn't see traps. He hunted, but he didn't know he was being hunted by circumstances. Isaac, blinded by love, continued to prefer Esau. The smell of the hunt seduced him. The warmth of the fire comforted him. But Rebekah, silently, wove invisible plans, and Jacob, quietly, waited. The field that Esau dominated with firm hands was about to become the stage for the bitterest loss of his life, and he didn't even realize it. In the darkness of the nights in Canaan, Esau slept heavily, tired from a day of hunting, while the silent stars traced in the sky a destiny he couldn't escape. If this message is touching your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the Knowing, the Word channel. Leave a like and share it with others who also love to learn more about the Word. Your help strengthens this work and allows us to continue bringing stories like this. Let's resume our journey and delve even deeper into the narrative. The sun descended slowly over the plains of Canaan, painting the horizon red. The day's heat still vibrated on the ground, and the air carried the dry scent of dust and sweat. Esau returned. From the fields, his bow hanging loosely from his shoulders, his hands scarred by the ropes, his feet heavy, dragging across the hardened earth. His breath was a sharp dagger in his chest, and hunger throbbed like fire within his body. For hours, he had chased prey, but the bushes had closed in, his steps had gotten confused, and the game had escaped. Sweat streamed down his face, mixing with dust, forming thick lines on his rough skin. His muscles ached, his throat burned, and his thoughts scrambled, reduced to one single need: to eat. Isaac's tents could be seen in the distance, shimmering in the wind. Esau quickened his pace, his chest heaving, his eyes searching for the warmth of home. But as he drew near, the smell of lentils hit him like a blow. It was a dense, irresistible aroma that rose in slow spirals through the afternoon air, mixing with the song of an almost mystical wind. The scent made him stop, close his eyes, and feel saliva flood his mouth. Hunger was now a living animal, gnawing at his stomach, buckling his knees. There sat Jacob at the tent's entrance with the pot before him. Steam rose, golden in the fading light. Jacob's calm eyes watched his brother approach. He didn't speak, just slowly stirred the wooden spoon, like a patient fisherman waiting for the fish to bite the bait. Esau fell to his knees, panting, his voice hoarse. "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Jacob tilted his head, as if considering a price, and the words came out of his mouth like a trap. "Sell me your birthright today." There was a thick, dense silence, where the world seemed to stop. The wind died down, the tents didn't move. Esau blinked, confused, like someone who doesn't understand the weight of the proposal. Birthright? The blessing of the firstborn? The right to be an heir to Abraham's promise? Esau felt his stomach rumble, the smell of lentils rising like a hypnotic cloud, and the pain of hunger extinguishing his reasoning. "I am about to die. What good is the birthright to me?" he said, his voice dry, his thought short. The flesh cried out. The spirit fell silent. Esau saw it now, the pot, the aroma, the fire. He didn't see tomorrow. He didn't see the legacy. Jacob extended his hand, his gaze firm, cold as stone. "Swear to me today." And Esau, without hesitation, without weighing, without listening to the invisible echoes of God's covenant with Abraham, swore. The words left his mouth like arrows with no return. The agreement was sealed, not with ink or parchment, but with the hunger that screamed louder than faith. Jacob silently handed over the dish. The red stew dripped between Esau's fingers, the hot lentils burning his tongue, his stomach filling, his body warming. He ate like someone devouring his own fate, unaware that each spoonful was a cry in heaven. When he finished, he sighed, wiped. His lips stood up and walked away as if nothing had happened. But heaven knew, the earth knew, Jacob knew. Esau didn't. He didn't know that by exchanging the blessing for lentils, he had torn an invisible veil that connected him to the promise. He didn't know that the words spoken there under the tent would cross generations, that his name would be remembered not as that of the brave hunter, but as the man who despised his inheritance. Night fell. Esau slept with a full belly, but the silence of the dawn hid a cry he still couldn't hear. The red dish had been just the beginning. Time, like a relentless wind, blew over Isaac's tents until his bones grew fragile, his eyes became blind, and his voice a whisper muffled by memories. Isaac, the son of the promise, Abraham's heir, was on the verge of the end. The servants walked in silence, respecting the man who had once heard God's voice and built altars, but who now merely rested in a dark tent, surrounded by worn fabrics and old scents. Esau, standing at the entrance, looked into the tent as one observing an open tomb. His face was marked by time, his eyes tired, his hands calloused from raising weapons and guiding flocks. He was the eldest son, the firstborn by right, but the forgotten heir. The scent of Jacob's clothes still haunted his memories, and the scene of his father trembling as he blessed him with stolen words was an open wound that wouldn't heal. Genesis 35:29 summarizes the moment with simplicity, but its weight was immense. And Isaac breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Isaac's breathing was shallow, broken, like a fire slowly dying out. He called out names that no longer responded, for Abraham, for Rebekah, even for Esau and Jacob. Voices mixed like a lament, carried by time. Esau approached, kneeling beside the bed. He touched his father's hand, now cold and wrinkled, and felt the weight of a history that could no longer be changed. He wanted to say something, but the words died in his throat. What could he say? I loved you, Father. Or perhaps, I forgive you. But no words seemed enough to cross the abyss that time had opened between them. Jacob arrived, his steps silent as if not wanting to wake the dead. He stopped on the other side, his hands clasped, his eyes downcast. The two brothers, separated by history, now stood beside the bed of the one who had united and divided them. Isaac breathed a last sigh, a light sound like the wind passing through the tents. Esau bowed his head, holding back tears like an animal swallowing its own cry. He knew it was no longer time for tears, but he couldn't help it. His father was gone. The man who had loved his hunting, who had preferred his scent, who had called him my son, now rested in silence. Jacob remained standing and motionless. Esau's eyes met his brother's for an instant, and in both their gazes there was a silent recognition. The blessing had been given, destiny had been sealed, but blood still bound them. They weren't just enemies. They were sons of the same man, shaped by the same hands, marked by the same history. The burial was simple. Servants dug the grave with firm hands, the children gathered stones to mark the place, and ancient chants were sung in low voices. Esau threw a handful of earth over his father's body, feeling the weight of farewell. It was as if each grain of sand carried memories. The sound of Isaac's voice calling him, the laughter around the campfire, the blessings that were never given. Jacob remained silent, and Esau did too. There were no speeches or long lamentations. Just the sound of the earth covering the body, the whisper of the wind, and the beating of hearts that carried the weight of all that remained unsaid. Esau stood up, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew Jacob would return to the tents of promise, to the land that had been given. But he, Esau, would return to Seir. There was nothing left for him there. The blessing had been lost. His father had departed, and time followed its cold, relentless course. In Esau's chest, the past weighed like a stone, but he knew he couldn't carry it forever. His father had departed, and history couldn't be rewritten. There was only the future, and even stained with pain, it had to be lived. With a last look at the grave, Esau turned his back and left. The sun shone on the mountains of Seir, and he knew he wasn't the heir of the promise, but he was the leader of Edom, and that, however painful, was what remained for him. The wind whistled among the mountains of Seir, lifting golden dust over Esau's tents. The land was harsh, dry, full of stones that cut the feet and plants that resisted the heat, but Esau called it home. As years passed, the desolate plain transformed into a vibrant territory. Tents multiplied like seeds scattered by the wind, flocks spread across the hills, and Esau's name became a respected whisper among the peoples of the desert. He didn't have his father's blessing, nor the promise of the land flowing with milk and honey, but he had Seir, and that was enough. It was his conquest, his inheritance, wrested by his own effort, not by another's gift. The weight of pain was still there, but Esau learned to bury it under labor, the hunt, agreements with neighbors, and nightly celebrations around the fires. His sons grew strong, with watchful eyes and broad shoulders: Eliphaz, Reuel, Jush, Jalam, Korah. Names that spread like roots through the land of Edom. Each son was a piece of his story, a silent promise of continuity. Grandchildren came later, then great-grandchildren, and the servants multiplied. The encampment that was once just a handful of tents was now a living city, breathing the dry air of sea and churning up dust under the hooves of animals. Esau's wives, Judith, Basemath, Mahalath, became matriarchs, their tents filled with sons and daughters, with songs and challenges. Esau's people spoke mixed languages, carried traditions inherited from Ishmael and Canaan, and kept alive the memory of their patriarch, the man who had lost the blessing but built a nation. Neighbors began to notice. Distant tribes sent emissaries, seeking alliances. The name of Edom, once just a personal mark, became the name of a people. Edom meant red, red like the lentils, red like the land of Seir, red like the blood that had flowed in hunts and in silent battles against pain. Esau saw this and felt pride. He walked among the tents, his eyes observing his sons training with bows, the servants shearing sheep, the women preparing food. It was a rising people, and promise of greatness, but he knew this promise was different from the one given to his grandfather Abraham. It did not come from altars built under stars, nor from covenants sealed by God. It was a promise forged by sweat, by strength, by the desire not to be forgotten. Nights in sea were long. Esau sat by the fire, gazing at the flames while his sons told stories. Laughter echoed, songs rose, but in his heart the echo of the lost blessing still vibrated. There was pride, yes, but also a silence he could not explain. He had built something grand, but he knew he was distant from the promise. Even so, Esau held his head high. He was the chief of Edom, the leader of a people who knew how to fight, hunt, plant, and multiply. Each birth was a silent answer to the destiny that had been denied him. Each victory was a reminder that even without Isaac's blessing, he had found his path. The boys grew up hearing about their father: Esau the valiant, Esau the hunter, Esau the founder. But few spoke of what had been lost. Few mentioned the bitter exchange for a dish of lentils, the cry of rage in Isaac's tent, the embrace between brothers, that did not erase the past. This was a story whispered at night, when the fire died down and the stars twinkled cold over the mountains. Edom became a nation. The names of its princes were recorded, and the men of other lands respected its borders. Esau knew the world would call him a patriarch, but he himself wondered in deep silences what could have been. He had moved forward, yes, but the mark of the promise lost was still there, like dust clinging to his skin, like the red of the land, of Seir that stained the feet of all who trod upon it. Time surged forward like a river sweeping everything in its path, and Esau's tents transformed into cities. The fires that once illuminated the solitary nights of Seir now gave way to large, populated encampments and improvised fortresses. Esau's name spread across the mountains, but not just as the name of a man. Now it was the name of a people. Edom. Genesis 36:15 records the names that began to forge this new identity. These are the chiefs among Esau's sons. The sons of Eliphaz, the firstborn of Esau, were Chief Teman, Chief Omar, Chief Zepho, Chief Kenaz, Chief Korah. The sons of Ruel were Chief Nahath, Chief Zerah, Chief Shammah, Chief Mizah. These were the chiefs of the families of Esau. Esau looked at his sons with a blend of pride and melancholy. Eliphaz, the firstborn, was strong like his father. Keen eyes, broad shoulders, a firm voice that commanded attention. Reuel, with his more reserved demeanor, moved among the flocks, counting heads and assessing the weight of harvests. His other sons grew in stature and influence, becoming natural leaders of the tents and caravans. Each son received a title, prince. One by one, they became clan chiefs, rulers over men and territories. Teman, with his sharp gaze, became the pride of the south. Omar, always ready for battle, commanded with a loud voice. Zepho was cunning, a skilled negotiator. Gatam, the tireless hunter. Kenaz, the disciplinarian. Esau watched them grow, and his heart swelled with pride. Edom was a nation of princes, and he, the patriarch who had planted this tree, was its very root. Songs around the campfires spoke of him. Esau, father of princes. Esau, who made Edom flourish. Esau, the strong. The boys mimicked his hunts. The young men drew inspiration from his stories, and the women taught their children to utter their father's name as a sacred word. But in the silence of the night, when the wind whistled among the rocks, Esau felt something different. He was the father of many, yet there was still an echo within him, an ancient muffled sound that never faded. It was the sound of the cry in Isaac's tent, the plea for a blessing that never came. It was the memory of goat skin on his father's hands, of the scent of the field that wasn't his, of Isaac's words trembling into the void, "I have blessed him, and blessed he will be." Esau could count his sons, name his princes, and see his tents multiply like stars on the nights of Seir. But the question lingered. What if? What if he had waited? What if he had controlled his hunger? What if he had protected his birthright? But he was a man who didn't allow himself to stop. Pain was fuel, memory was a scar he didn't show. The people of Edom needed a leader, and he would be that leader. The decisions had been made, the paths chosen. Esau's sons gathered in circles, debating strategies, drawing borders, planning hunts and battles. They had weapons, flocks, servants. They had royal blood. They were princes of Edom. And Esau, seated on his seat of honor, watched them with a gaze that blended pride and an unnamed sadness. The name of Edom grew. Caravans crossing the lands of Seir carried the name of the people. Foreigners said, "They are the sons of Esau, the princes of Edom." There was respect, there was fear, there was recognition, but for Esau there was also the silence of what couldn't be changed. He was the father of princes, yes, but he wasn't the heir of the promise. He was the lord of Seir, but not the patriarch of the covenant. He was the builder of a nation, but not the bearer of the blessing that came from the God of his fathers. That night, Esau rose. He walked among the torch-lit tents, gazed at his sons, his grandchildren, his servants, his flocks. His people grew, his lineage strengthened. The name of Edom was being carved in stone, and yet the emptiness of the lost blessing echoed like a whisper in the wind. The wind swept through the mountains of Seir, carving the rocks with its invisible force. The tents of Edom swayed under the pressure, but the men remained firm. Esau's voice, deep and authoritative, resonated among his people. "We are sons of the earth, warriors of the desert. No man will take what is ours." Esau's pride, forged in battles, hunts, and sorrows, had become the backbone of his people. They were Edom, sons of the red, of the blood of the warm earth. But beneath this pride lay a bitter, deep root that grew like a dark tree, the pain of loss. The Midrash Tanhuma, in its commentary on Toldot, speaks of how the rivalry between Esau and Jacob didn't end with the embrace at Peniel. The embrace was merely a gesture, an instant where blood spoke louder, but it didn't erase the past. The pain Esau carried infiltrated his veins like poison, and more than that, it spread as an invisible legacy to his sons and grandsons. In the tents of Edom, the elders told the story. Your father Esau was betrayed by Jacob. He was deceived, robbed, humiliated. The blessing was taken, and we inherited the pain. It was a whisper repeated from generation to generation. The boys learned to hunt with bow and arrow, but they also learned to distrust the sons of Jacob. They were brothers, yes, but brothers who carried a deep crack, a fissure that time didn't close, only widened. Caravans from Canaan brought news. Jacob's descendants prospered, multiplied occupied lands. Israel grew, built altars, spoke of divine promises. In Seir, the men listened, and a heavy silence hung in the air. Jacob's name was spoken with a mixture of envy and disdain. There was pride in being Edom, but there was also a wound that throbbed. In nightly conversations, why was the blessing given to him? Why not to us? Esau, sitting before the fire, watched his grandchildren playing with small bows and spears. Pride filled his chest, but the pain was still there. He no longer spoke of Jacob openly. It was a name he had learned to swallow, but not to forget. Esau's eyes, aged and hard as stone, carried the reflection of a history his sons didn't fully comprehend, but which they felt as an invisible weight. Esau's resentment became his son's inheritance. It wasn't necessary to shout or openly teach. It was in the gestures, in the glances, in the stories told in dim light. When the young men asked about Israel, the elders shook their heads, a sign that said, "They are not like us, they are brothers, but not truly so." And thus, the conflict took root. Each encounter at the borders was charged with tension. Each dispute over wells or paths became more than a fight between shepherds. It was an ancient battle born from Rebekah's womb, nurtured in Isaac's tent, sealed with tears and cries. Edom grew. Tents became villages. Villages became fortresses. Esau's sons organized themselves into clans, into armies. They didn't have Abraham's blessing, but they had the strength of the desert, the hardness of the stones, the pride of those who survive without divine favor. They were Edom, and the name carried the bitter taste of Esau's choice, but also the determination of those who don't yield. In the quiet of the night, Esau looked at the sky, at the same stars that had shone over Abraham and Isaac, and knew that they also shone over him. But the sky seemed more distant. The silence of the stars didn't answer his questions, didn't heal his pains. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and told himself, "Jacob has the blessing, I have the land." But deep down, he knew the pain of loss was the invisible foundation upon which Edom was being built. The cry of one man had become the mark of a people. The desert wind blew strong over the tents of Seir, lifting the red dust that tinged the sky with a fiery glow. The men of Edom walked with their faces covered, protecting their eyes from the scorching heat. But Esau remained still, standing on a hill, gazing at the horizon. His disheveled hair fluttered. His eyes, half closed, peered beyond the visible, as if searching for something lost in time. Below, Esau's sons trained with swords and spears. His grandchildren ran among the flocks. Servants attended to the tents. Women distributed water in clay jars. The people of Edom grew. Their name spread along trade routes, across borders drawn in the sands. But for Esau, that name was more than a title. It was a living scar. That is why he was called Edom. Genesis 25:30 recorded the words that would mark him forever. The moment seemed small, almost insignificant. Esau, tired and famished, seeing the dish of lentils in Jacob's hands, saying without thought, without weighing, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, because I am exhausted." It was just a phrase spoken in a moment of haste, but words have weight. The Bible recorded the moment like a seal, and the name stuck. Edom, red. Esau could never escape it. Each time someone called him Edom, it was as if an echo resonated in the depths of his memory, the scent of the lentils, the warmth of hunger, the blind haste, the rushed exchange. He could be strong, he could have flocks, he could be called a prince, but the name pursued him like a ghost. Edom was not just a color. It was a reminder that he had sold something that could not be recovered. The men of Seir shouted his name with pride. "Edom! Edom is our Lord! Edom is the father of princes!" But for Esau, every shout was an invisible knife cutting deep. He remembered the moment as if it were yesterday, the hunger burning his stomach, the strong smell of the stew, Jacob's calm voice asking for the birthright in exchange. And he, without thinking, without weighing, had said, yes. The name carried the history. His sons inherited it. His grandchildren repeated it. Foreigners pronounced it with respect. But he knew that respect was built on a mistake. Edom was a nation, but it was also a brand. It was the living memory of a moment when the flesh spoke louder than the spirit. Esau tried to bury the past beneath the stones of Seir, but the past has deep roots. The name of Edom was pronounced at the borders, in commercial exchanges, in alliances made under the scorching sky. It was a name of power, of strength, of authority. But in the silence of the night, Esau knew that the name also carried the weight of his own weakness. He saw his sons grow and felt pride, yes, but also a silent sadness. Eliphaz, Teman, Omar, Gatam, Kenaz, names that echoed like the branches of a tree, but all linked to the root of Edom, the name born from a dish of lentils. In the dead of night, when the fire crackled and the men slept, Esau looked at the sky and remembered. He remembered the smell of Isaac's tent, the rough touch of the goat hair, the trembling in his father's voice, the cry he had uttered when he learned that the blessing had been given to Jacob. And more than anything, he remembered the word he had spoken, "Let me eat some of that red." The weight of the name was like the weight of sand on his feet. He could walk, he could move forward, but the sand always clung, always scratched. Edom was his name, but it was also his prison. Even so, Esau held his head high. He was the leader of Edom, the father of princes, the lord of the mountains of Seir. The world could call him Edom, and he would answer because that was his story, not the one he had chosen, but the one he had built. The name carried pain, but also strength, and as the wind blew, carrying dust and memories, Esau stood firm, his eyes fixed on the horizon, the weight of the name on his shoulders, and the determination not to be forgotten. The wind sliced through the slopes of Seir like invisible blades, bringing with it the scent of burnt fires, spilled blood, and broken promises. Esau's tents trembled under the growing tension, and the men's voices became whispers charged with distrust. What was once mere pride and strength now transformed into something darker. Silent disputes, veiled betrayals, broken alliances. Flavius. Josephus, in his chronicles, describes Seir as a land where Esau's sons grew up as princes, but also as rivals. The strength that had united Edom under the patriarch's leadership now began to fragment. Sons looked at the throne with hungry eyes, and servants whispered in the shadows, plotting their own gains. Esau, sitting in his main tent, felt the burden of leadership increasing with each passing day. His graying hair, his sun-marked skin, and his memory-filled eyes revealed a man who had fought much, but who now fought against time itself. He watched his sons gathered in separate circles, discussing in low voices, with quick gestures and suspicious glances. Eliphaz, the firstborn, showed impatience. Teman and Kenaz exchanged glances that concealed ambitions. The pride of having begotten princes turned into a slow poison. Each son wanted more land, more servants, more power. The borders of Seir were disputed, and conflicts with neighboring tribes fueled internal tension. Alliances made out of necessity quickly became motives for betrayals. A vanished ox, a stolen flock, a misinterpreted word. Everything was a reason for quarrels that escalated into violence. Esau tried to maintain order, gathering his sons, speaking of unity, reminding them that the blood that ran in their veins was the same, that Edom needed to be won. But the words were seeds cast upon stones, hard, heavy, and quickly buried by the sand of pride. Teman wanted more lands to the south. Omar claimed the wells to the north. Zepho spoke of trade routes. Kenaz of pastures. Korah murmured about secret alliances. Gatam sought support among the younger servants, and Amalek was the fiercest, the most impatient, the most prone to war. Esau's legacy, which had once been the promise of a great nation, now fragmented. Before his eyes, he saw his sons and grandsons fighting like jackals over the carcass of a prey. Each name of a prince that echoed in the lands of Edom was a reminder. What was meant to be a united people had become a mosaic of ambitions. Esau sat alone, hearing the distant cries, the hurried footsteps, the rumors of betrayals and hidden plans. He held the staff of leadership in his hands, but he knew his time was running out. The inheritance he left was not that of a peaceful kingdom, but of a divided nation. The echo of his past choices still whispered in the cold nights. He remembered the bowl of lentils, the cry before Isaac, and the embrace with Jacob. Each memory seemed like a stone on his shoulders, weighing, crushing, reminding. And now the inheritance was this: princes who were brothers but saw each other as enemies, sons who carried his name but did not carry his heart. The pride that had sustained Edom was the same pride that now brought it down. On that night, as the campfire danced high, Esau sat alone, feeling the cold wind of Seir against his skin. The shadows of the tents flickered like specters, and the muffled shouts of a discussion echoed in the distance. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and knew the past always returns, and even the strongest man cannot prevent pain from becoming a legacy. Night covered the mountains of Seir like a dark cloak, and the campfire cast trembling shadows over the tents. The wind blew cold, carrying the scent of burned wood and roasted meat. The men of Edom slept, but Esau remained awake, sitting, alone, his eyes fixed on the glowing embers. The voices had fallen silent, but in Esau's mind an old memory returned, as vivid as if time had not passed. The bowl of lentils. He could smell the warm, dense, spicy aroma, a scent that invaded his nostrils and made his stomach churn. He saw the color, that dark red, almost a shimmering blood under the firelight. Steam rose, bubbles bursting on the surface. And he saw Jacob's hands, firm, careful, stirring the wooden spoon as one who controls destiny with a simple gesture. Esau closed his eyes and returned to that moment, hunger burning inside him like fire on coals, his body tired, his muscles aching after the hunt, dry sweat clinging to his skin, his feet bruised by the stones of the path, the smell of the field. On his clothes, the blood of the hunt still fresh in his hands. And before him, the simple common dish. But to Esau it seemed like everything. "Let me eat some of that red stuff, because I'm exhausted." He had heard his own voice, hoarse, hurried, without thinking. Hunger was an animal roaring in his chest, and reason was distant like a mirage in the desert. Jacob had looked at him with cold, calculating eyes, like one holding bait before a beast. "Sell me your birthright today." Esau had felt the world spin, but he hadn't stopped to think. What was the birthright, after all, compared to the hunger that devoured him? What was an invisible blessing, a distant right, compared to the scent, the warmth, the taste of something he could hold, chew, swallow? "I am about to die. What good is the birthright to me?" The words left his mouth like a sigh, without weight, without reflection. But they were words that changed everything. He didn't know it then, but every syllable uttered was etched in time like an echo that would never be silenced. Jacob had insisted, "Swear to me today." And Esau swore, not with blood, not with stone, not with a formal pact, but with words cast. To the wind, words that became chains. He held the dish, felt its warmth, its weight, its scent. He took the first spoonful to his mouth, and the taste exploded, spicy, hot, comforting. His hunger calmed, his body warmed, his stomach filled. But along with satiety came something else, a strange sensation, an emptiness that grew as he chewed. Now, so many years later, Esau still tasted it. On nights like this, alone, surrounded by the silence of Seir, he heard the echoes. "Sell me your birthright." He saw Jacob's face, his hard eyes, his outstretched hand, and felt the weight of having traded the invisible for the immediate. Genesis 25:29-34 recorded the moment as a simple fact, but for Esau it was a wound. Thus Esau despised his birthright. A short, dry sentence, but one that carried the weight of an entire life. He had tried to bury that beneath the weight of years, beneath the growth of his children, beneath the building of Edom, but the past was like fine dust. It entered through the cracks of his soul, accumulated in the corners, suffocated without warning. Every time he heard the name Edom, he felt the memory pulse, red like the lentils, red like the blood, red like the price he paid for a hasty choice. In the darkness of the night, Esau wondered, would it have been different if I had waited? Would I have been the heir of the blessing, the patriarch of the promise? Would I have built altars like Abraham? Would I have been the father of Israel? But the questions didn't change the past. The bowl was empty, the dish had been cleaned, and the words pronounced couldn't be unsaid. He was Edom, the man of red, the father of princes, the leader of Seir. But he was also the man who had sold everything for a bowl of lentils. The wind blew strong, extinguishing an ember in the campfire. Esau took a deep breath, raised his eyes to the stars, and remained silent. The memory of the bowl haunted him, but he knew dawn would come, and with it the burden of being who he was, the man marked by a choice that couldn't be undone. The wind sliced through the slopes of Seir like invisible razors, carrying with it echoes of ancient battles, forgotten names, and broken promises. Esau's name still echoed in the valleys, but now not as a cry of pride, but as a whisper laden with weight. In a distant time, when the voices of prophets tore through Israel's silence, Esau's name was pronounced again. not in the fires of Edom, not in the banquets of its princes, but by the mouth of a man raised by God to speak with power. Malachi, I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. The words recorded in Malachi 1, 2, 3 were not just a judgment against a man, but a sentence against an entire people. Malachi's cry was like a sword cutting across generations, spanning centuries to reach Esau's descendants, the sons of Edom, the men who bore their father's mark. Edom, which had been a strong people, was now remembered as a land of desolation, and I laid waste his hill country and left his heritage to the jackals of the desert. The prophet's words fell like a hammer on stone, unyielding. The people who once walked with heads held high, who had challenged Israel at the borders, were now called the people with whom the Lord is angry forever. The weight of this was overwhelming. It was as if Esau's entire history, from Rebekah's womb to the mountains of Seir, was summarized in a divine verdict. Rejected, not by Jacob's hands, not merely by a brother's cunning, but by God himself. The Sut, men of Edom, who heard Israel's words, felt the sting of shame. They carried Esau's name, but now that name was synonymous with rejection. The pride of being Esau's son became a bitter memory, a burden that weighed like invisible chains. Esau, even in death, couldn't escape the echo of his choices. The bowl of lentils, the cry before Isaac, the tense embrace with Jacob, the silence. Before his son's quarrels, all seemed to condense in Malachi's words, I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. It wasn't just a human judgment, it was the voice of the eternal, drawing a line in the sand of history. The people of Edom tried to resist, to maintain their identity, to preserve their pride, but the words pursued them like shadows. They were the children of whom God had rejected. They were the people of a man who traded the invisible for the immediate. They were the heirs of a pain that had no cure. Esau, if he could hear, might weep again, as he wept before Isaac. Perhaps he would fall to his knees, tearing his clothes, like a broken man. But time doesn't go back, and the words of the prophets can't be undone. Malachi's cry was a seal. Edom had been forgotten, rejected, abandoned to the dust of the desert. The tents of Edom still existed, the princes still ruled, but there was a weight in the eyes of each man, an emptiness in the words of each woman, a shadow in the steps of each child. They knew they bore the name of a man whom God said he had hated. The wind blew stronger, and sand rose in whirlwinds. The mountains of Seir, red as dried blood, seemed to tremble under the weight of Malachi's words. Esau's name, once spoken with force, was now a whisper of bitter memory in Israel's heart. The prophet's cry was a reminder, I have loved Jacob. For Edom, it was a sentence, I have hated Esau. The sky remained silent, but the earth carried the echo of that voice forever. The wind blew one last time over the mountains of Seir, lifting the red dust that tinged the sky like an ancient memory. The tents of Edom, now worn by time, swayed. To the sound of low voices, whispers of generations carrying a name heavy as stone. Esau's name was not erased, it remained etched in the stones of Seir, in the records of kings, in the stories told around campfires, in the echoes that spanned centuries. But it was not a name of honor, it was a name of division. Esau, the hunter, the strong man, the firstborn, became the symbol of a mistake. The bowl of hot, red, fragrant lentils, offered in a moment of weakness, transformed into a burden that could never be lifted. The echo of that choice spread through generations, and each time the name of Edom was spoken, there was a shadow behind the word. The men of Edom remembered, we are sons of Esau. And with that pride came also the uncomfortable silence, as if each voice carried an unspoken question. What if he had waited? What if he had chosen differently? Neighboring nations looked at Edom with distrust. They were warriors, yes. They had princes, flocks, caravans that crossed the desert. But they were also a people known for rejection. They were those against whom the Lord had spoken. I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. They were those who had lost the blessing, traded the invisible for the immediate, despised what they couldn't see for what they could hold. Esau's name remained, but as a warning, a reminder etched in history. Beware of what you despise. Edom, though strong, was fragmented. Families quarreled, alliances were fragile, princes competed for power. The land of Seir, harsh and unforgiving, seemed to reflect the spirit of its people. Resilient, yes, but fractured within. What began as the promise of a strong lineage became a history of disputes and downfalls. Esau, the man, disappeared into the dust of history. His body was buried in some corner of the mountains, and the earth quickly swallowed him. But his name, the name remained. Edom was not just a territory, it was a memory, an open wound. The bowl of lentils continued to weigh heavily. No altar was raised for Esau, no song of praise. There was only the echo of his decision, a moment of hunger, a hasty choice, a promise traded for a momentary taste. Time passed. Generations came and went, but the bowl of lentils still hovered like a spectre over history. Esau's scattered children tried to find strength in his name, but the mark of what was lost never left them. They were a people of hot blood, hardened hearts, strong hands, but they were also a people of ancient pain, of wounded pride, of promises that slipped through their fingers. In the end, Esau's legacy was not a lasting kingdom, not an unbreakable lineage. It was a memory etched in rock, the man who sold his inheritance. The children of Edom grew up hearing the name of their founding father, but they knew that behind the strength was a story of loss. They knew they were a people born of a choice made before a bowl, before a brother, before a father, before God. The wind continued to blow. The sands of Seir covered ancient footprints, erased paths, but they didn't erase the memory. The name of Esau, laden with glory and pain, whispered among the stones as a warning that time couldn't silence. Choices have weight, and the price of despising what is eternal never disappears. And don't stop here. There's so much more waiting for you on screen. Click the next video and continue discovering hidden secrets and mysteries of the Scriptures. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. It was an honor to share this story with you. May the Lord bless your life. We'll see you in the next chapter.